Hello and welcome to the next episode in our webinar series. This month we're going to be talking about older women's experiences of domestic violence. But first, a couple of housekeeping items. Just a warning that some of the content that you're about to hear could be upsetting to some folks, so please practice good self-care and step away or pause the playback if you need to. And also, we'd like to acknowledge that the Women's Resource Center is located on Treaty 2 territory and also operates on Treaty 1 territory, which are the lands of the Anishinaabeg, Cree, Anisinenew, Assiniboine, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and are also the homeland of the Métis Nation. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. First, we're going to do some definitions. We're going to talk about what's meant by the term older women. Some people might be wondering that. Then we'll go into talking about violence and intersectionality and why that's important when we're talking about violence against older women. We'll talk about the different types of violence experienced specifically by older women, the unique experiences of older women in situations of violence, barriers that older women may experience when seeking care or help in situations of violence, how to recognize signs of abuse against older women, and then we'll finish up, of course, by listing some resources for you, which will, as always, be linked in the description below, and then our contact information will be provided at the end. So what do we mean when we say older women? It's important to note that research on intimate partner violence and family violence typically centers the women of reproductive age, which for the most part is 18 to 49 years old. And info on older women, so studies and articles and research, can start anywhere from the age of 50 on, or they can start at the retirement age of 65 plus. It might even start later than that at 70, 75, 80. It really varies by study. So for our purposes, we're going to be using the broadest definition, which is defining older women as 50 plus. And disclaimer, because some people might going, hey, 50 is not old, and it's definitely not. We're not saying that 50 is old. We just want to be representative of all women who are not typically included in studies of IPV and family violence, which again is typically 18 to 49 years old, because the research on IPV and family violence tends to stop at when women are considered to be at the end of reproductive age, which is considered age 49. So women's status changes when they end reproductive age. Don't even get me started on the patriarchy of medicine and science in changing how women are viewed when they are no longer able to reproduce. That's a whole nother issue. For our purposes, it's important that we're also centering intersectionality in our analysis of violence against older women, because age is not the only factor to consider when determining how violence can affect people differently, how best to assist folks who are experiencing violence. And experiences of older women in violent situations are going to vary based on things like their socioeconomic level, disability, gender identity, sexuality, culture, and religion. So all of these multiple factors are going to impact a person's experience of violence. So, for example, an older woman, who has a disability is going to experience violence different than an older woman who is a newcomer, who is going to experience violence different than an older woman who is socioeconomically secure, and so on and so forth. So there are three types of violence I want to highlight that are experienced by older women. So the first is elder abuse, and elder abuse is defined as a single or repeated act or lack of appropriate action occurring within any relationship where there's an expectation of trust, which causes harm or distress to an older person. So this definition can encompass not only abuse by family members and spouses, but also abuse by caregivers and hired help and things like that, medical professionals, service providers, all of that kind of stuff. And then there is intimate partner violence and family violence. Typically, intimate partner violence and family violence can be placed under the umbrella term of domestic violence, but I'm going to differentiate between intimate partner violence and family violence specifically as it is experienced by older women. So intimate partner violence refers to behavior by an intimate partner or ex-partner that causes physical, sexual, or psychological harm, including physical aggression, sexual coercion, psychological abuse, and controlling behaviors. Intimate partner violence can include acts of physical violence. It can include psychological violence, economic violence, or financial violence, and it can include things like coercive control. Family violence is defined as an action or failure to act when a person in a close relationship, so married spouses, common law partners, or family members, are involved in any form of violence or abuse. The two people don't have to be living together, have had a dating relationship, or have a child together. And domestic violence or family violence is almost always containing elements of fear and control and power over an individual. So family violence can be perpetrated by an older woman's children or nieces and nephews, brothers and sisters who might be in the picture, whereas intimate partner violence is perpetrated by an intimate partner, either current or former. So for the purposes of this webinar, we're going to be focusing on intimate partner violence and family violence because there are those gendered elements to those types of violence. And elder abuse, while it's important to note that of course it does occur, it could be its entirely own other webinar. So we're not going to focus on that one as much today. So older women experience situations of violence, family violence, and intimate partner violence differently than women of other ages. For a variety of reasons, it could be because they've experienced violence throughout the course of a relationship, and have therefore experienced violence for a long period of time. Also, in the cases of violence experienced by many older women, it's been found that the cases of violence have escalated as the women have aged. And there have been some factors in particular that have been known to contribute to escalations of IPV and family violence against older women. So that could be the retirement of a spouse, children growing up and moving out, diagnosis of chronic or terminal illness, things like that that happen specifically as people age. And the types of IPV and family violence experienced by older women have also been shown to shift as women age, from physical violence, which is more commonly experienced by younger women. And as women age, they tend to experience more psychological violence or coercive control. Not to say that they don't also experience physical violence, it just seems to be the trend that the types of violence that women experience as they age shift from more physical to more psychological types of violence. So financial control was also found to be present in situations of IPV and family violence experienced by older women. So having money withheld from them, having their expenses tightly controlled, not having access to bank accounts or access to any kind of funds. Older women also might have different vulnerabilities to violence due to potentially diminishing physical or cognitive capabilities, which are natural results of aging. Our bodies and minds change as we get older, and that could impact how vulnerable older women are to violence. Older women experience violence differently also for the reasons that they may have been socialized to accept and reproduce particular gender roles and social norms that could make discussing or leaving violent situations difficult. So for example, in studies of the unique experiences of older women in situations of IPV and family violence, it was found that some women viewed violence as normal, as a normal part of like a romantic relationship or a marriage. Some women didn't actually view their experiences as violence because it had been normalized or rationalized to them through the social norms and gender roles that they were socialized with as they were growing up. Some women view violence as a private or embarrassing issue that isn't supposed to be discussed with anybody. Some women viewed marriage as inescapable. That kind of idea that you marry once and you marry for life and nothing should break apart a marriage, and that divorce is not an option. That's the view of many of the women that were in this study. But some also stayed in violent situations as a coping mechanism. They stayed in these situations because they assessed the risk and determined that staying in situations could be safer than trying to leave in some situations. Some viewed leaving a violent situation as wrong, that kind of same kind of idea that marriage is for life and you don't get divorced. Some women also stayed in these situations for the benefit of their kids. They didn't want to break up their marriage while their kids were still young. So these are all considerations that older women have taken into account when experiencing violent situations. Older women have also said in this study that they contended with feelings of loneliness, regret, and isolation when experiencing violence. And unique to older women, they experienced higher levels of isolation when experiencing violence than women who were younger than them. Partially, this was because they feared judgment from others in some situations, which led them to isolate themselves. Or in other cases, the abuser isolated them as a part of the violence that was being perpetrated. Either way, in this particular study or overview of multiple studies, it was found that older women tend to experience these feelings of loneliness, regret, and isolation at higher levels than women who are younger. There are also some specific barriers to care that older women experience when they're experiencing violent situations. So there's often a lack of awareness surrounding available services for older women. And this could potentially be compounded by some older women having challenges with technology, or kind of not being as technologically advanced as younger women might be, because a lot of the services that are available are advertised online. There could be a resulting lack of awareness for older women around the services that could be available to them. Often, rural communities don't have services readily available, which can impact older women. There also could be issues with transportation, so maybe they don't drive anymore, or they're reliant on somebody else for transportation, and that could impact their ability to receive care. They might be living in more conservative or smaller communities where discussing IPV or family violence is frowned upon or unsafe, and that can compound with what we were just talking about a second ago, with kind of the gender norms and social norms that many older women have been socialized with from a young age, where discussing family violence or IPV is not something that they might not view as appropriate. Again, there are also societal assumptions that violence against older women is uncommon, and it's not. It occurs at similar rates to violence experienced by younger women, but because of the way that older women are kind of viewed within society, there's an assumption that violence against older women doesn't happen because it's not talked about, and therefore there's not as much of an awareness around it. For some older women, there could also be language barriers. So this goes back to that intersectionality piece that we were talking about at the beginning, where older women who are newcomers, for example, might not have English as their first language. And since a lot of services are in English, they might experience a barrier to accessing care because of that. And I think probably the most important part is recognizing signs of violence against older women, or potential signs of violence. So if you're seeing bruising or injuries in older women that aren't matching the stories that they're giving on the origin of those injuries, that could be a sign of violence or abuse. If they're lacking medical care supplies, like if they need hearing aids or glasses and they're not getting those things, that could be a sign of violence or abuse. Same with medications. If they're not getting the medications that they need, that could be a sign of abuse. It's definitely a sign of neglect for sure, but it could also be a sign of abuse. If there are family members moving in seemingly suddenly that weren't kind of in the picture before, so like adult kids moving in that weren't kind of around as much, or cousins or nieces or nephews moving in or hanging around a lot that weren't around before, that could be a sign of violence or abuse, and that would be kind of that family violence aspect. If there are changes in social activities, that could be a sign of abuse. So if an older woman isn't attending the church group that she usually goes to, or if she's not going on outings with friends like she normally does, and there's kind of no good quote unquote reason for it, that could be a sign of violence or abuse. There could also be changes in behavior that might indicate violence or abuse happening. So if there's a dramatic increase in anxiety or fear or depression, kind of without any external cause, then that could be a sign of abuse. Bills going unpaid could be a sign of abuse as well, that financial control aspect, especially if, the bills are always paid on time and in full, and all of a sudden she's kind of like falling behind on things or not paying bills. That could be a sign of abuse, whether financial abuse perpetrated by an intimate partner or by a family member in terms of family violence. So just kind of keeping these things in the backs of our heads can help kind of recognize violence against older women when it could be occurring. So here are some of the resources that I used to create this presentation. There is a great study at the top about violence against older women. It reviews the literature around violence against older women and kind of coalesces it into one space. It is a little bit lengthy, but I think it's definitely worth the read. There's also the Gender-Based Violence Learning Network that has a newsletter on violence against older women. Could be beneficial to check out. It's Not Right.ca is an organization that advocates against elder abuse. And they have this kind of brochure about how you can identify and help older adults at risk. The Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse has a webinar on intimate partner violence in older women that might be good for you to check out. And then finally, there's a toolkit for service providers that could be useful if you are encountering older women in your work on how to bridge the gap between older women experiencing abuse and the services available to them. As always, those resources will be linked in the description below. And of course, here's our contact information. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. Thanks, and we'll see you guys next month.